Yes, I mean, this is perhaps just a matter of degree. Obviously, there are things to do with the ideas current at the time, climate ideas and so on, which give a certain flavour to novels written at a certain time, and incidentally, which make it possible to write in one way at one time and impossible to write in that way at another time. But I think, one speaking rather loosely, I think existentialism may be something of a special case here, because it is a rather literary philosophy. It emphasizes all sorts of things to do with the human predicament. And Sartre's marvelous philosophical work, L'Être et le Néant, is sort of full of pictures and conversations, as it were. It's true of Hegel, too, actually, that there's an awful lot of amusement and literary stuff, as it were, in both Hegel and in Sartre. And this is interesting. This has something to do with the rather dramatic form of the thought in the philosophy itself, that there's some kind of drama which can be exhibited. There's some kind of feeling about the world which belongs both to the philosophy and to the novel. But one can see that it's not easy from looking at other works by Sartre and by Simone de Beauvoir, where as soon as the existentialist voice comes in, the work of art is rigidified. Yes, I think it was just a lucky chance that he managed to pull it off in La Nausée.
Yes. Well, I think given what you've now just said, I think perhaps we're not so far apart as I thought. Let me raise another kind of question with you, which again, you as a practitioner of both philosophy and novel writing are almost uniquely well placed to answer. One of the outstanding features of philosophy in the 20th century, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, has been a completely new kind of concern with language, hasn't it? And self-consciousness about language. And this has resulted, among other things, in a sort of very refined and scrupulous use of words and concepts and so on. Do you think that, I mean, in the case of somebody like yourself who trained as a philosopher and then became a novelist, do you think that has in any way entered into the way you write novels or affected the way you write novels?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I recognise what you mean about this particular interest in language, and this, of course, I mean, the formalists are quite right to suggest that that things have changed. I mean, this, of course, is something which every writer knows instinctively.
Yes. You can no longer write like the 19th century novelists.
No, and of course we're not so good. We're not anything like as good as the great 19th century novelists. But also we write differently, and we would find it difficult to write as they did without an element of pastiche being involved, though I think some writers would actually regard this as kind of challenge.
Why can't you write in the way that...
Well, this is a very interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I can't exactly answer that question. I mean, the obvious differences one has in mind here, of course, are things to do with the standpoint of the writer and the sense in which the way in which he inhabits the consciousness of his characters, his relation to his characters in this sense. I think, I mean, perhaps something one might say in a minute is that, of course, the author's relation to his characters reveals a great deal about the author's moral standpoint anyway. But this is a technical point, really, about the author's relation to his characters, that now, unless he's playing some kind of game, and of course the formalist would say he's always playing game, and the more games he plays the better. But I would say, unless he's playing some kind of game, he will instinctively express himself in a way which is different, that he will inhabit the consciousness of his characters in an absolute sense. He won't describe them from the outside, he'll describe them through consciousness, or if he suddenly describes them from the outside, this will be an obvious literary device which will hang up the reader for a moment.
Well, we're approaching the end of this discussion, and just now, a moment ago, you did say that you would like to take up the question of what the author reveals about his moral presuppositions. So can we perhaps end with that? What is it that you would like to say on that question?
Well, this would be part and parcel of my view of literature, and indeed my view of art, which is that it's people sometimes say you must regard art and literature as being either the production of autonomous objects or a reflection of the world. I mean, I think it's both, and this seems to me to be obvious, that it is both almost always, in some sense, a reflection of the world, perhaps not absolutely always, but almost always, and quite properly so, a reflection of the world, and it's also the production of a formal object. I mean, one wouldn't call it a work of art unless it had certain formal properties and a certain kind of appropriate to the subject matter autonomy. Therefore, I would say art is mimetic. It is language is referential. Language does refer to the world, and in pursuing this particular activity of producing literary work, particularly, of course, fictions, and particularly, of course, the novel is the most obvious case, one is inevitably involved in making moral judgments. And this is something to do with the nature of language, that if you tell somebody to describe their room or something, which one might think was a fairly neutral activity, this description will be crammed with value judgments. And this is something which one can't avoid, not only in the choice of what they describe, which is important, but in the words that they use. Words are full of value. And this is very obviously the case, of course, in the author's relation to his characters. And this comes back partly to this distinction between fantasy and imagination, that if the relation is a fantasy relationship, the work is damaged, both because the expansion, the ability to exhibit the world in some way under a certain light is damaged, and very often, of course, the values which the author expresses are improper ones. And I think that the novelist may as well admit this, that he is going to be involved in making moral judgment, and his relationship to his characters is going to reveal his morality. So that there is a kind of moral challenge involved in art, both because of at a prior stage, in the self-discipline of the artist, expelling fantasy and looking at things other than himself, which I think art is very much concerned with removing a veil of fantasy, which normally perhaps wraps one's head as one gazes at the world, and looking at the world without this fantastic cover, that the artist is concerned to see what is other than himself, and in a sense to respect it, and to have the self-discipline to check the rushes of fantasy to which he may be subject. This is the work of imagination then creates a kind of space, and one does have a kind of feeling of imaginative space in great works of art, as if one was standing in a big hall or something. At the prior level he has to do this, and at a secondary level, when he's actually creating the work, he will find that he has to judge his characters, and he has a way to take sides. And this can be done, of course, in many, many ways. And, of course, ambiguity and mystification and so on come into this. And the author, who, of course, is enjoying himself all the time, as well as giving pleasure, perhaps, to the reader, or aiming to entertain or even instruct the reader, the author can play all sorts of mystifying games with the way in which he reveals his characters. I mean, Henry James is full of such games, for instance. But the revelation is there, and the judgment is there.